China is the world's largest economy by PPP, purchasing power parity. If not by US dollar exchange rate, it will become world's largest economy within 5 years. By that time, China's middle class will be twice of the US population. So today it's 400 million, so US population is 300 million. So in 5 to 6 years, I said in 10 years, should be less than that. It will be 600 million at least middle class. And medical insurance and pension for all. China has achieved that. Many outsiders fail to notice that China is already a country with pension, with medical insurance for all. And China also has the largest home ownership. Yeah, in the cities, 85% people have properties. In the countryside, it's 100%. So that's already changed the fate of China and with tremendous impact on the world. China also exports more tourists than any other country. And China is also now the leader in alternative energies in terms of production and production, in terms of investment and production, whether it's wind energy, solar energy, renewable energy. We talk about the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. We also began to discuss in detail what's called the Green BRI, Green Belt and Road Initiative, what we call the ecological civilization. And China's model, the Chinese model, I think will inspire many people, especially in terms of fighting poverty, in terms of global governance. I think the world is shifting, as Peter mentioned earlier, from a kind of, I call, vertical structure to a more horizontal order, both in terms of wealth, in terms of ideas, in terms of power. In other words, in the past, more vertical. The West is above the rest. Now it's increasingly more horizontal. The West and the rest, including China notably, more or less on a par with each other in terms of wealth, power, and ideas. Now here is my question. Is the China model an alternative to the Western model? And my answer is both yes and no. Let me start with no. So that will hopefully relieve the concern of many people in the West. China has no messianic tradition. Yeah. China does not want to impose its model on us. It's never in the Chinese blood. Yeah. And it does not seek to impose its model on others. I always say, when Admiral Zheng He went to Africa, to Southeast Asia with his mighty fleet, 100 times larger than Columbus' small fleet, China did not colonize any country. China was engaged in trade, a bit show off, cultural pride or whatever. And China has a high degree of political independence that few other countries can match, because China is, today, modern China is a product of armed struggle. And this CPC armed struggle is indigenous force. Yeah. 22 years of fierce armed struggle. So China has a high degree of political independence. It can say no to the United States. We say no all the time. So this is important. And also China has a long history of a strong and neutral state. As China invented the public servant examination system, the state is viewed, is indeed, in relative terms, more neutral and more disinterested in the eyes of most Chinese. So this is important. So this is no. In what sense it's yes? The essence of the China model is a country should endeavor to find its own ways and means for development, for modernization, for prosperity, in the light of its own national conditions. This is crucial, yeah. We call seeking truth from facts. Don't copy any other models. Try to find something adapted to your own model, your own situations. But many of Chinese ideas and practices may inspire other countries. If you look at the BRI initiative, for instance, this idea of planning is not very popular in the BRI. Many countries or even cities invite Chinese think tanks to draft plans for them, for particular industry, for particular city, etc. And all the idea of zone is also very popular. China set up already over 70 industrial and technological zones in BRI initiative, which is working very well. In the zones you have The idea is being experimental. You can try out new things within zones and then spread them if it's working. And in the end, I think a China model may usher in a paradigm shift from what's called the democracy versus autocracy, as described so much in the Western media, Western political discourse, to a model of good governance versus bad governance. It's about governance. That's important. And this, the hapless former president of Afghanistan, he said, if given a choice, he would choose Chinese model, although it's very difficult. And finally, a famous line from a famous person from Cambridge, Bertrand Russell. And he was in China in the year 1920. That just after the First World War, he felt very sad about the madness of the Western powers. So he came to China. He found that in the Chinese culture, there are elements which are so good for the world, especially this passion for peace. But at that time, the Chinese intellectuals were lack of self-confidence because China was beaten again and again by European powers. So Bertrand Russell counseled his Chinese counterparts. He said, eventually, one day, you will have enough defense capability. By that time, your peace, culture for peace, will be a tremendous asset for the whole mankind. I think this is China today.
So my question here is, the Chinese government continually reviews corporate debt, credit risks, and fluctuating property market, as well as the global shifts to target growth around the 6.5% economic growth, as you mentioned just now. So what are its priorities and what are potential risk factors?
Yeah, here comes an important part of China model. Yeah. And I remember, Peter, in your introduction, mentioned the financial crisis, 2008. Before they have a 1997 financial crisis in Asia. China is the only large economy which has not experienced any financial crisis. Why so? Because of the China model. And my analysis of a typical society or a state is not division of power in the American sense, but the balance between three powers. I call this social power, especially media, political power, government and political parties, and the power of capital. Yeah. This balance, if it's in the interest of most people, that's a good balance. If this balance is in the interest of a few people, minority, it's a bad balance. That's the problem with the United States and with Hong Kong. Yeah. You have more, I'll give you an example. iPhone produced in China. From our calculation, at least 90% of profits go to American companies, other intermediary companies from other countries other than China. Yeah. China or Chinese workers have gained only less than 10% of profits. But this 90% of profits, say, go to United States or European companies, these profits fail to go to the general public through whatever you call institutional arrangement or taxation. As a result, you have 1% versus 99%. Yeah. Most people, 70% at least in the United States, did not see their income rise over the past 30 years. But in the case of China, we are a socialist country, and most people have benefited. Even with 10%, they are distributed more fairly than United States. I want to answer your question this way, because if you allow the market to completely play its own role as a new liberal economics advocate, then the gap between rich and poor will become a huge crisis for China. So government from time to time, if in the United States, the capital power is more powerful than social power and political power. In the case of China, political power is above social power and the capital power. Yeah. Under condition, it's also subject to, I would say, influence of capital power and social power. It's interactions, but on the whole, political power is more powerful than other powers. But what's important is whether this power represents the overall interest of most people. So far it is. So the Western media fails to tell the people, if you talk about CCP, Chinese Communist Party, it's overwhelmingly positive force in the minds of Chinese. But they try to portray it as dictatorship, as whatever. So we have sympathy for the Western media, as it did not convey accurately the image of CCP or China as a whole. So sometimes these interventions, I agree, may not appropriate. But if you look at past 4 decades as a whole, if you have encountered one financial crisis, as many countries did, United States included, I read remarks by Mahathir, Malaysian Prime Minister. He said in 1997, within 1 week, our 2 decades of development were wiped out by Wall Street. He was angry. So China tried to prevent this crisis, So long as they are meeting the needs of most people, that's fine. But if we do not allow, if you understand Chinese, we call it 钱生钱的游戏玩得上瘾 money breeding money, and then you are addicted to that and think this is the best way, this is the free market, this is great for the country. No, we think this is wrong. Finance must serve the real economy.
So just now I just rushed here from my lecture, and the lecturer told us in the lecture of modern state and its alternatives, the lecturer told us one of the most classic example, and he mentioned China as a modern state, but he also mentioned it's weird because he says China now faces many challenges, such as technology, environment, and most importantly, he mentioned that there's some conflict between the Chinese government and its people. So I want to ask you about what do you think is the logic of
What's his name? But this is a very, I call, stereotyped view. We hear this for decades. That's why from every 2-3 years you have a media headline, China will go bankrupt, whatever. The Chinese state is doomed, whatever. No, it's we understand China should be in a more sophisticated way, and Chinese statecraft is much more sophisticated than that. If you look at the leadership, it's very competent. If you look at the relationship between the state and society, it's not, the Western media try to portray Chinese state very nervous, on the verge of a color revolution or waiting for a color revolution. And dissidents represent the future of China. It's nonsense, Dissidents represent a tiny minority, maybe 1 or 2% of population. And so you mentioned the challenge from technology, from science, from other things, but actually all countries face challenges of this kind. The point is whether you can cope with the challenge and thrive. Yeah. So as I said, maybe you missed my first part of my lecture. I said that today China is in the premier league of the new technological revolution, on the par with the United States. And most probably China will do better than the United States.